And our next speaker is Mike Gourley. He is currently the producer and presenter of Radio New Zealand's weekly disability issues series, 1 and 5. It is a role he's taken up again following a 3-year stint as Senior Advisor for Disabilities with Sport and Recreation New Zealand. Before that, Mike had worked with Radio New Zealand for a decade. During that time, he was involved with the Disability Issues TV series, Inside Out. His experience with both radio and TV broadcasting saw him win a Rosalind Carter Fellowship in Mental Health Journalism in 2001. Mike holds a diploma in tertiary teaching and has completed several papers at Canterbury, Victoria and Massey universities. He has lectured on disability studies at the Wellington College of Education, as well as served as an EEO consultant to Wellington City Council. I hesitated there because I was trying to remember what EEO, Equal Employers Opportunity Consultant to Wellington City Council. He also set up and taught the first ever Wellington TOPS course for mental health consumers. Mike is the immediate past president of the Disabled Persons Assembly. His research interests revolve around health and disability, including mental health, employment, broadcasting, and media, and sports and recreation. And I wish you could see this photo here that I have of Mike with this wonderful Mickey Mouse headphone on his head that he's not wearing today, but I still found him in the crowd. Mike Gourley.
Kia ora koutou. A bit like Tyrone, I was prepared to come here and get into full preaching and exhortation mode. And then as I looked around the audience, I thought with about 1 or 2 exceptions, I knew everybody here, so I thought I would be preaching to the converted. And that gets a bit tiresome, both for the converted and the preacher. So I think maybe what could be more usefully done is to actually think about this process, because I think we all pretty much come from a similar philosophy and a similar approach. But think about, do we have something to fear from this process of welfare reform or the welfare working group, or are there some things that it might be doing us some favours? And I guess for me the jury's still pretty much out on that, but I think this is a very important part of trying to maximise the favours it might be able to do us and minimise the things that we might have to be afraid of. But there are some things that don't augur that well, in my view. About 30 years ago, I was unemployed, had moved to Wellington, and was often seen down at the Petone Central Hotel about 2 o'clock in the afternoon to watch Days of Our Lives. I was a soap opera addict from way back. And of course, in those days in the lounge bar of the Petone Central, I think there might have been rather 2 lovely old biddies in their 60s or 70s who would accompany me watching Days of Our Lives. And they would say, well, you know, how's things going? I'd say, well, I'm unemployed. And they say, oh, those bludgers, those dull bludgers. And then I'd repeat the fact that actually I'm unemployed too and I'm on a benefit. And they say, oh, well, of course. In your case, we understand. And it made me reflect on the fact that the deserving poor has often haunted benefit reform in the past. I mean, when you think about it, in the Western industrial kind of model, the very definition of disability really was around those who were legally able to beg against those who were not. In other words, if you had some kind of impairment as a result of disease or war or whatever, then you were able legally to go out into the streets and beg, but if you didn't, then you'd be locked up. And I thought, have we learned a lot since those days? Think back to 1991. When we had the mother of all budgets, Ruth Richardson's budget, which significantly cut every benefit except invalid's benefit. No wonder there was a migration of people from sickness and unemployment to invalid's benefit. I often wondered when people put up big graphs of how the numbers of people on the invalid's benefit had gone up so markedly that they didn't actually realise there was a very, very simple reason for that. You kept more money. So the whole idea of income maintenance is really important. And I thought back to those days 30 years ago when I was on an unemployment benefit, and it didn't matter then financially which benefit I was on. would I have migrated to if I was going to lose $30 a week simply because I was on a different kind of benefit? I'm pretty sure I would have migrated. And therein lies part of the problem. So maybe we have won something, given the current thinking around benefits and welfare in general, that we're no longer in some ways perhaps seen as the deserving poor. We're just in there now with all the rest, who should be moved off benefits into some kind of paying work. And of course, the way that that's often phrased, particularly when it comes to disability, sounds quite positive. You know, we're talking about playing to people's strengths, not their deficits. We're talking about focusing on ability, not disability. And that kind of sounds good because, you know, I think we all believe that we should be focusing on ability and not focusing on deficit, and focusing on strengths and not weaknesses. But is there something behind that use of those phrases that we should be afraid of? Let's reflect very briefly on the status of disabled people in terms of benefits and unemployment and labour market participation. Just to think about the labour market or labour participation, about a third of disabled adults of working age are not in the labour force, which is twice as high as non-disabled people. Now that comes from the 2001 census figures. And unemployment rates, or the rates of people who are disabled and on benefits compared to the general population, has always been much higher, whatever else is going on economically. So when we had very low unemployment generally, you could still point to the fact that disabled people were more generally likely to be more unemployed or not participating in the labour market. Now that's despite the fact that people, as Tyrone and Leo and Marge have alluded to already, that's not because of a lack of motivation. In fact, if you look at the motivation of people who aren't in the labour market, who want to be participating in the labour market, then about half of the people who are identified as people with disability are wanting to be in paid work. So it's not because of some genetic predisposition to not want to work, or some kind of thing that goes along with the various conditions and impairments that we live with, that somehow mean it's inevitable that we shouldn't be in paid work. What's going on then to stop people, to prevent people, to discourage people from entering paid work? Maybe it's got something to do with the fact that employers often don't believe that we are able to be in paid work. Maybe it's got something to do with the fact that the way we've been portrayed over the years doesn't really lend itself to the idea that we might be capable of contributing. The idea that we are recipients of care, that we require care instead of support, that we have caregivers instead of people who solidarise with us. Maybe that gives people an impression that we're quite vulnerable, don't have resilience, and therefore, why would you employ this person? So maybe there's a lot of things going on around the way we're portrayed. Maybe there are a lot of things that historically have led to people being in a less able position to take paid work, such as leaving school with no educational qualifications, which is horrendously high amongst disabled people leaving school, leaving compulsory education. I just had thinking about the fact that I even dare to say that I've completed several papers at various universities, because basically what that means is I'm a dropout. I didn't finish, but that's by the by. But people do leave school without qualifications, which puts us at a real disadvantage when it comes to, particularly in an increasingly competitive work environment. And of course people mention the R word, and we all know that things have got tough, and that there's some debate about whether things are still tough or not. And yet right smack bang in the middle of that reality, we're now having a whole set of pressures being put on to say that we should actually be off benefits and in paid work. Well, yeah, we want to, but say, why hasn't that happened?